there's a 20.
You should be good. Just give it a minute.
Okay. I believe we should be live at this point. I'd like to welcome everyone coming in. I'm glad to see you guys, even though I can't see you guys in person. But we have a presentation today from an architect at Johns Hopkins University. Her name is Mrs. Viteri, and she's from, I believe, also from the Bloomberg School of Public Health. And if you'd like to take it from here, really the only other thing I have to say is if you guys have questions or anything to talk about in the chat, please feel free to drop it in, and we've got officers happy to respond. So yeah, Mrs. Viteri, if you'd like.
Thank you, George, so much. Hello to everyone who is out there, and also, it would be fun to see you, but I appreciate being able to join you tonight. So thanks for your interest. As George said, my name is Mrs. Viteri, Maria Viteri, I'm more used to. I am an architect with Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. I'm pretty new in that position, actually, just a little over a year, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. I've been in the industry, and this is kind of crazy. I've been in the industry now almost 40 years. And when I think about that, I think, wow, I can't even believe that amount of time has gone by. I started by my interest or in school in New Orleans. So I'm from New Orleans. I actually was born in South America. I've lived in Pittsburgh, which it feels to me, I always describe as another city like New Orleans, except with hills. I have also lived in Columbus, Ohio, go Buckeyes for anybody who's thinking about OSU, and now have been in Maryland for about 16 years. And so I mention all of those things because as we talk further, it'll explain a little bit about my interest in architecture and how some of those different places have enhanced, who I am even as an architect. So I got some early questions from you guys as a group, and so I'd like to answer them along the way. And so I actually have a little presentation to be able to guide me through the questions. So I'm going to share my screen and go to that presentation. So to kind of start off, just to give a little bit more idea about me, this is my roadmap of 40 years of being an architect. And so some time ago, a long time ago, I was at this point in high school where you guys are now. I went to an all-girl high school. And so it was very different in terms of what was offered there at that time. The things like drafting and CAD were not really part of the curriculum. It was really more the following of liberal arts. So my decision to go into architecture was a little bit out of the norm. I went on to college and I studied at Tulane in New Orleans. And I chose Tulane because, as I was saying earlier to Mr. Bernstein, there were reasons that required me to be home in New Orleans. And so that was the local university. And I'm very lucky that that was the fact. And so they had a great architectural program. And that became my first school. After I graduated, I started what everybody then starts wondering about is that whole job search. And so when I graduated, it was one of the many economic up and down times, a little bit, kind of like now, some of the things that we're feeling. And so the job hunt was not as exciting and fruitful as what you sometimes come out of college thinking, hey, this is going to be great. What's going to, I'm going to get my great first job. My first job actually was in engineering. And I wasn't sure what that was going to mean for me because as someone who wanted to follow the world of the pursuit of architecture, I kind of felt that I had stumbled into a different direction. But quite frankly, I ended up working with a retired engineer who had started a new practice, and he made me his architect for this practice. So I had to do a lot of learning very, very quickly. I worked with him about 4 years, and when I left, I really felt that I had seen a lot of things that I would not have seen if I had gone the more traditional route of architecture. When I left with working Mr. White, Mr. Bill White, when I left with him, I ended up taking a job as an architect at Children's Hospital in Pittsburgh. And so I went from New Orleans to Pittsburgh. And, I've always been asked, how did you make that move and why did you make that move? And, along the way, this story is that I was looking online or actually in job searches in the newspaper. And I really wanted to go to Washington, D.C. So I really wanted to move to Washington. And the Washington Post had this great job. And it was with a children's hospital, and it was doing a renovation project for the children's hospital. And I thought, I really need to get this job. So I applied, and next thing you know, I get a phone call, and it's from Pittsburgh. And not what I was expecting, but the job was literally what I hoped for it to be. So when you work for an owner versus an architectural firm, there's a whole different level of responsibility. So while I was on staff there, I basically was responsible directly for every design decision that impacted the patients that came in. And I could immediately see my mistakes because they were being designed in my desk in the sub basement, and then they were being constructed 2 and 3 floors above me. So it was really fascinating to be able at the end of the day to go up and see this was done well, this was not done so greatly, this has to be changed. So it was total on the job learning, and it was fantastic. Um, while there, I met the partner of a local architectural firm in Pittsburgh who was starting to do some of the bigger projects for Children's Hospital. So because I was pretty familiar with the hospital and with the clients, he recruited me to his firm. And so from the point of my job search to this third job, that was really the first true time that I worked for an architectural firm. So it took me that kind of this little train route to get there. It was fantastic. Some of the projects that I'm most proud of physically were done there. And then I decided to make a transition, and I'll answer some of this transition question later. Went to graduate school, and decided that even after going through this business degree and international affairs degree, I was very much an architect at heart. So I went on to another job with a nonprofit doing construction consulting. And, I ended up spending 20 years there, which was fantastic. Retired early from there. And now I'm in my job at Johns Hopkins. So as you see the up and down, I even have what is my next big thing, because I hope that there's another big thing. But what I want to start off in this conversation in encouraging you guys is that, we always think that when we choose something that we're going to do when we're young or at any point in our life, that our road is going to be just exactly how we plan it out. And sometimes the surprises are phenomenal. And so for me, when I shade all that in green and say that's a plus, that was my added opportunity from not staying on that straight line and kind of taking a different route. So just to, encourage you guys that sometimes surprises are really, good if you just swing with the surprise. So I'm going to get into the questions. And the first question is often the typical question: did you always want to be an architect? And the answer is no. I originally wanted to be a pediatrician. So for the longest time, I was positive I was going to be a pediatrician until I took biology in high school, and I did very poorly. And so I was talking to my dad after getting a D on the test, and he basically said to me, he says, I think you need to choose another career because you're likely to kill people if you go into medicine. So his humor made me react in a way that it's okay, sometimes you have to take a different route. So I was very fortunate growing up. We did a lot of different travel. And as I said, I was born in South America, so we also traveled back to South America. And this is a picture of Ecuador, where I was born. And so I began to realize that I was very curious about how cities come together and how people live. And so as a senior in high school, we were offered an elective in humanities, and that included art and culture and architecture. And I realized literally probably like on a January, time period in the middle of the senior year that I really truly wanted to be an architect. And I don't think that I've really, ever not wanted to be an architect from that point. So that's been a really good career for me. Another question that I've been asked is, what was your favorite project? And this is a little tough because as you see, this may not be what you would consider your most traditional architectural project. This is an exhibit that was at the National Building Museum of in Washington, D.C. So I don't know if anyone's ever been to the National Building Museum. It's a really cool building, not too far from the Capitol. And it has many exhibits about architecture and city planning. And I was part of the team that worked as a curator for this exhibit. And the idea was, at the time, I was working for a nonprofit that was focused on masonry construction. And the idea was we always do things in the same way when we're building with bricks or stones or tile. And can we do something different? So all of these different pictures here are different things that four recognized architects did with materials, whether it was like a terrazzo wave. So nobody ever really sees a terrazzo floor that kind of comes up like a California wave, or lightweight concrete that looks like puffy clouds, or brick that gyrates, or even like stone that's translucent. So the project very much went along the lines of what I believe in as a collaborator in the industry, which is basically we always have the opportunity to learn from a lot of people, and especially those who actually are closest to the materials. So four architects were invited to work with four craft workers, and together they all came up with these ideas. And it was my job basically to keep the project going, to offer material, problem solutions. And although this was now almost 14, 15 years ago, I'm so thrilled to still, and honored to still be friends with these architects today. So it's been really a project that's been very meaningful to me. Along those lines of projects, another question was, what is the most important project that you've worked on in your career? And I think this was even tougher. And as you can see, I have three pictures here, so I couldn't decide on the most important. But there are two more, the most important categories. On the buildings are of research buildings. When I worked in Pittsburgh, I was asked to be part of a research building design team. And this brick building here is the Children's Hospital Pittsburgh Rangos Research Center. It was actually the first research center that the university area had done, 9 floors of wet labs, a lot of people to talk to, a lot of sensitive research, right, basically in the middle of the university area. And actually the building looks old. It was refurbished. And so the reason that this was such an important building was because we used the real estate at a very important corner, and we're able to refab what used to be a piano warehouse into a working research building. It was very complicated. And so I want to take a chance to say that in the world of architecture, you get to be all kinds of architects. I call myself a very functional and practical architect. So for me, the world of healthcare and hospital building and research buildings, it's totally up my alley because of the detail of all the things that are important. There are design architects, there are interior architects, there are strategic planning architects. So really, it's a very broad field. It's not just about the design of a building. But this was a very critical and important project because in my career, because it sort of put me in or opened the door for my expertise. So from this project, I was actually asked to lead this Women's Research Institute building project. This is for Magee Women's Hospital in Pittsburgh. Both these projects are still, working after 30 years. And this Magee Women's Research Building is the largest women's research institute in all of the U.S. So a lot of, excitement, and, I get to go to Pittsburgh because my oldest daughter is at Pitt. And I'm always proud going into the neighborhood to see that. But the other thing that's very important to me is being able to teach the next generation. And so Masonry Camp is all about that. And in my role, I worked for a number of years with the International Masonry Institute. as Director of Sustainability. And part of that included this Masonry Camp program, which brought together architects from across the country and craft workers from across the country to literally live together for a week and work together on how to build things. So there were designs that they did in teams. They created parts of buildings in teams. And there was so much learning and collaboration that they basically, years later, we would hear about how this program had changed the direction of their careers, either as an ease to a better project position with their firm or superintendents for construction companies. So this idea of being able to make sure that this industry that I really am passionate about is available for the next generation is really important to me. So that's the reason I wanted to, highlight all of that. So as my little, I guess, railroad or roller coaster, first slide indicated, I took a break and I went back to business school. And the question here was, what pushed you to not only get a master's in architecture, but in business administration as well? And this is one of those sort of funny moments. I'll start by a full transparent confession that when I went to Tulane, the amount of work that we did was pretty significant. And when I graduated with a bachelor's degree. But years later, when the accreditation board came through and reviewed the amount of program that the graduates at the School of Architecture were doing, the accreditation board for colleges established that we were doing master's level work. So everybody who had graduated basically was contacted by the university. And I'm going to tell you, for those that are thinking about fees and college costs, for $50, I got my master's degree from Tulane, because all I had to do was to pay for the diploma, because they upgraded the diploma because of the level of work. So that's the best bargain, that in education. But so it was a master's out of more the level of work versus, when I graduated, it was a bachelor's. But I did go on and went to graduate school primarily because of my interest in international development. And so after a number of years in healthcare, I felt that I had an opportunity living in Pittsburgh to take a break and go back to school and try and maybe see what other road I wanted to fulfill as an architect. So actually, I started in the master's program for public and international affairs, and they had a dual degree with business administration. And my brother actually had gotten an MBA, and he's a chemical engineer, and he talked about the importance of understanding business and industry. And it was a hard job for him to convince me to do the MBA, because I was interested in the international affairs program. But when I realized that it just took another 6 months to do it, I did do the dual degree. So what pushed me was really my interest into international affairs. What convinced me on the business side was my brother sort of having that foresight to say, it's really an important part of any industry to understand how business works. And then these are just some of the things that across the board, it's important to know how to finance or make business decisions, no matter literally what industry you're in. What would I say is the main draw in an architect's career? So what's the principal reason why architects become architects, and what's a negative feature? So the big reason I think that architects become architects is because you're literally on a regular basis able to see these ideas that you visualize in your mind become tangible projects. And there's a difference for each one of them. You actually have a chance to help people improve the way that they work or they live. So you are responsible for how people move within the environment. You have a choice to make the environment look a certain way or be sustainable in different ways. So there's this, I guess, maybe even a slight bit of an interesting control, that an architect sort of has in this creativity to use a city or a building as a palette of how people can live in it. And I think that's the biggest thing, is this impact on how people, use their space. What's the main negative feature? And I would have to say that it's the amount of work. And so it may not be so expected that the amount of work that occurs even in school. So it's a very rigorous program. As I mentioned, the amount of work that we did then later was applauded and congratulated with a different type of a degree. But it's a tough undergraduate program. It's very rigorous, and it's there's good reasons for it, because the schools are training people to think in a very precise way. And so it's as rigorous as going through the thinking process, let's say, of being a lawyer, of having to look at things differently. In times of work, we are always facing very hard deadlines anymore, and so work has to be done. So if it needs to be done, it has to be done. And so during this time of pandemic, where everybody's sort of schedules are upside down, and people are up until 2 and 3 in the morning, because what else are we doing? There's a lot of exchange of emails and business happening because a deadline needs to be met. So it is a lot of hard work, but the truth is that it's a lot of fun work. And so what I want to kind of take a little break from me talking, I want to share a video that was made by a friend of mine. And so Jeannie Gang, who is the principal of Studio Gang, she is one of the architects that was involved with the Masonry Variations Museum project. And she has a very wonderful perspective of how, about architecture, that I'd like to share with you guys. So I'm going to do a little different screen.
Ms. Viteri, there's actually a question, if I can bring it up real fast. Ms. Viteri, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm
Are you
sorry.
having?
We can't see the screen.
Oh, I am so sorry.
No, it's perfectly fine. I didn't know if you could hear me.
Yes. Actually, let me see. Sorry about that. So you were unable to see the screen altogether?
Yeah, we couldn't see the screen.
Okay. I apologize for that. So I'm just kind of sitting back. Let me see. Okay. Is there a screen that you can see here? Okay.
I can see it.
It's very engaging. Right. Even if you don't live there, you can experience this movement and see the sun patterns moving across this building. What's really interesting with the American Museum of Natural History is we're working with this idea of flow, but flow from the aspect of moving people in and through the building, but also this aspect of flow in terms of space and discovery. And we used a lot of analog methods for studying flow, even working with blocks of ice in the middle of the winter, melting them with a blowtorch or hot water to capture these qualities that happen from flow and embody them into the project. Almost like if you're going through a canyon or some kind of landscape in an effort to make people curious about science. Going toward terrestrial is learning lessons from how nature constructs things. There's lots of interesting things we can learn from nature, both from how animals build nests, but also just the physics of how things stand up and how they can work without huge impact in each environment, without using a lot of energy. This is this incredible ravine at UC Santa Cruz, and students come across this bridge through a forest of redwoods to get to Kresge College. What's interesting about the redwoods is they actually are families, and they're connected below the ground. So we try to preserve the clusters intact and weave in between and in and out of them. So looking at all the things that live in this forest, we were able to come up with a design here that maintains the clusters and families of redwoods. In biology, the tree canopy we know is full of biodiversity. There's so many communities that live way up in the canopy. So it's this interesting unexplored area, but it also holds a special place in our imagination. And this idea of being up in the tree house or climbing up in the trees is something that I've always tried to capture in projects like the Writers' Theater with this walkabout that people can go out on during intermission or go out and be really literally in the canopy of the oaks surrounding. And in the University of Chicago Paris Center, in the placement of the main great room up at the top, perched above the height of the neighboring buildings, to give people a sense of this elevated height up there. You'll be surrounded by these roof gardens and views of Paris all around. This is called a stage buoy. It was our design for a stage for the artist and performer Nick Cave. Basically, we thought about what is a stage, and we wanted something that they could interact with. But what's really interesting is just in designing a movable object like this, which can all be moving at different times, like this. This is just too fun. To solve this, we have to work with other people besides just architects and experimenting with the material and asking the question, what are you made of? I think this aspect of our practice really goes beyond the digital experimentation and really works directly hands-on with materials to find out their qualities.
So I wanted to share that a little bit because it really, and I apologize for the glitch in the beginning, but it gives a huge variety of what architects are able to do. And again, how when you realize that or you learn that, how much more you want to participate, within the industry. So that is my best advocate for saying why why architecture, and certainly, I wanted to take to share that. So I'll go back to some of the questions. All right, so I think an average day in the world of architecture isn't all about designing. Actually, I wanted to let you guys know that it's a lot about just managing projects from an office type of a level. You're usually on a number of different projects at the same time. They can be of different lengths. Oftentimes, I would be on a project that would last for 2 to 5 years, while also managing small, maybe month-long projects. And that's very typical. My day today, just to share with you guys what I did today, I had a meeting where we talked about planning for a new building. I had to follow up with some submittals for construction. we're in the middle of a lab move. So this picture is all of this equipment needs to be moved out of this old lab into a new lab. We have some space planning and always the calls and emails. So there's a lot of things that happen, and I think the average day is not an average day. I laughed at this question, you know, when one becomes an architect, is there a lot of grunt work? And I apologize, but my first response was, what do you consider grunt work? And I think that a lot of it is perspective. There is not an industry that doesn't have some level of grunt work, I guess, let's say. So the idea of doing things at all levels happens across all industry. This is actually Jeannie in understanding how these materials worked by actually going to the shop herself and getting her hands dirty. So it really is all about your perception and your approach on how you develop that work ethic for what you want, you know, how you go about the projects. I was asked if there are more teams in or solo projects. And this was from a shot from this morning. So this was a team project from this morning, planning for a new building. There are a variety of different roles there. So we've got architects, we've got engineers, we've got sustainability managers, we have operations, misspelled operations, people who are with the owner, people who are with the contractor. So for this 1 hour discussion on some early thoughts in the building, it took 3 architectural engineering firms, a contractor, and 1 owner. And this is very much what all the projects look like. All the projects have this level of collaboration. Like you guys at school, our job has been affected by the global pandemic. I mentioned that I've been at Johns Hopkins now for about a year. I actually started in December of 2019, and by March I was at home. So working remotely, and now I share some time in the office, some time in at home. But it's hard to be remote, as you guys, you know, have learned. It takes a lot more of having to have the patience to show up and ask questions, but we're all faced with the same things. We have dogs barking in the background, you know, cars coming up, UPS man, all of that kind of stuff. And what I've learned from all this experience is that people are really a lot more forgiving in realizing that everyone is in the same place. And so being honest and open with what you're doing and how you collaborate and, you know, making sure you're speaking up, it's always really important. And that's what's come out, you know, how my job has been affected by the global pandemic. This was an interesting question, and that was, I think, more wondering if there are any changes that now are going to happen to the home office because of today's virtual world. And we all had everything that we needed for this pandemic in order to be able to stay home and be in school. For the most part, there's a lot of challenges there, but for the most part, if there was a phone and Wi-Fi, we were able to make it. And so I don't see many stylistic changes in the home office area type space. But what I do see is that there's a lot more focus on living healthy, having spaces that perform, and creating buildings and homes where you can age in place. So that's really what I'm seeing in architecture. So many people, you know, like when I've talked to high school students, everyone says, well, you probably have to be really good at math and you probably have to draw really well to be an architect. And I would question either, because you learn what you need to learn through the school. But these are some there's some skills that probably people don't know about that are important. So you do need to be curious about building and assembling things. You have to be the kind of person that is, you're walking down a fence, your fingers are on the fence, touching things around you. You should be interested in researching and investigating things that, you know, you see. Why is it different? How could I do something along that line? Problem solving is important, being able to visualize. People skills are super, super important, because as you saw in one of the slides of that 22-person team, that was only one project. I'm currently on 5 different projects. So people skills and listening and communicating and being able to consider the feedback when someone is not happy with the design that you're giving them or the direction that you're giving them, super, super, super important. It's important to be curious in many areas because architects are said to be, I think, experts of little, master of nothing. So you know a whole lot of surface topics about a lot of different things, but you don't always master any one topic because you're sort of the conductor, at the above end. And good organization, that also helps. So those are the questions. And before getting on to any additional questions, I want to leave you guys with a few tips because I mentor at the high school level with the ACE program. And a lot of students always said, well, do you have any tips about what I should do? So I want to share some of the tips. And I want to start off by basically saying that we focus a lot at the high school level on how it is that we can build our grades and build our resume and build a piece of paper that we feel really is all that's going to demonstrate who we are. And the truth is that everyone else in your class is doing the very same thing. So unless you know who you are and brand you and do what you really, really want to do, and I know it sounds like a cliche, but unless you really do that, you won't stand out because you'll be like every other smart kid in your school or every other musician or athlete in your school. So you just have to really be uniquely you by being, what you are. So do you is really the first tip. Express yourself. So in doing you, believe that you have an idea and a voice. What I find wonderfully, always invigorating about the design industry is that you don't have to be my age to have an idea. You can be 19 to have an idea. You can be 91 to have an idea because actually architects do practice for that long. So, speak up, use your voice, express yourself, because you can be the owner of the best idea in the world, but until you let it out and have the confidence that someone else is going to share that, we won't know about it. And that would be a shame. Seek balance all the way through. So I know that this is a time that everyone is, in high school, you're always wondering what's that next step. And I mentioned for me, it was reduced because I had to stay in New Orleans. I was requested, growing up, being from South America, culturally, you don't send your kids off to school. So you keep your kids close. And so that was how I ended up staying. But so it doesn't matter where you go. It really doesn't. And I know it seems contradictory to where you guys are right now, currently in your hearts. But believe me when I say that if you go where you feel at home and where you will do you, you will really find that best balance. And later on, I can't remember the last time anyone's asked me where I went to school. And I think I stopped getting that question probably when I was 25. So it doesn't last all that very long. First jobs, and I mentioned my first job was with an engineering firm, and it took a swallow because I didn't think that was what was going to happen. So again, seek balance. There's no single road. You don't have to work for, Google or Unilever. You don't have to work for all of these to really be who it is that you're going to be. Mistakes aren't a bad thing. So practice, practice, practice doing what it is you like. When it didn't go well, recover, and that's okay. Figure out what you did that was wrong, where you can learn from it, and use that as a moment to ask for help. So again, use your voice, ask for help. And then finally, it's not a straight line. Stay curious, keep learning. Sometimes what you learn that you believe has nothing to do with what you're engineering or architectural or construction or medical background is going to be anything. What you learn is a nice add-on that will give you a different way to look at things. So, I thank you guys for inviting me to speak. It's always, this has been very much of a surprise even for me to take sort of a look at my own, road. And so I don't know if there's any additional questions.
Yeah, so we actually do have actually quite a few questions I've got here on my list, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I wanted to say, on behalf of everyone that popped in here, thank you very much. Just for the presentation you've given, it's been wonderful. I think it's been very enlightening. So while we go to get right, into it, one of the questions I saw, since MDTSA is a lot about combining, um, STEM and arts and things like that. How would you say the combination or merging of arts and STEM shows up in architecture? And how have the arts, maybe studying arts or English or some form of humanity, enhanced your architectural abilities?
That's a great question. That's a really great question because many people and many of my friends even through school were always curious about anthropology and how people live cultural, these cultural differences. And many people believe that as part of understanding how people live today, you really need to see how it is that people have lived in the past. In literature, you understand that. You understand how people moved, sometimes even just the courtesies of life during that time that would explain why buildings and homes were designed in maybe more of a very formal or regular symmetric type of a way. Music. One of the projects actually for Masonry Variations, the lightweight concrete project, the curves that it got was all based on a score of music. So they used that to resonate what the wave looked like and then made that into architecture. So music and architecture, again, it's another way to see space when you see it musically. Dance, the same kind of thing, the movement, the flow that Jeannie talked about. So there is a lot of, of association there. In terms of what we might sort of sometimes see like the STEM, the harder maths, the physics, that is part of the training and that's part of working in a more collaborative team with the engineers. Architects ultimately learn from engineers how to stand buildings up. What are different building tensions that, forces that go on buildings. So you learn that as you put these masses together. So it's really quite an interesting, unique way of bringing both of them. And I think that it's very possible to start in either one of them and find your way into architecture.
Great response. I'm glad to hear this such a big connection. I think architecture is probably one of the better, one of the best subjects to combine both arts and STEM. I do want to ask, so that it's a little bit easier to see us both. Would you mind unsharing your screen?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we've got a couple more questions, if that's okay. One of the ones I have here is, how has living in different places changed your view of your work?
It's a lot of different places when I start to think about it. So, and it's how people relate to where they live and how they relate to each other. And so by that, I'll explain that. So in South America, everything is about very much a nuclear family. You live close. You have things, your grocery stores, your bookstores, your schools, everything very, very close. New Orleans is very much like that. New Orleans is very much of a city that celebrates its neighborhoods. I did grow up, within the city of New Orleans, a block and a half away from Canal Street, and we would ride our bike into the French Quarter and watch the artists. So it was literally living in the city. But there was that respect for different ideas, different cultures, different colors, colors of not just of people, but colors of, of how you expressed the things you wore or how you designed your buildings. I found the same thing in Pittsburgh. In Pittsburgh, sort of added a three-dimensional view to me. So in Pittsburgh, I began to understand how weather began to impact things, how terrain impacted things, how buildings can overhang and how they respond to find places for inside once you cannot be outside. In Columbus, we lived in Columbus, Ohio, for about 5 years. And I would have to say that the energy of being young was part of that city, being a collegiate town, sort of rooting, for one common mission. So it's really all about how people lived, how people moved, how comfortable someone might be in a, in a stadium and how that stadium should open to them. And now living in Maryland, it's very different. It's a different feel. It's probably the most different because it's less city living, for me. And so that contact of how people still want to communicate and find their places outdoors, that's what I watch for. And so it's neat to see places, even within Severna Park, some of the little coffee shops that are opening up to attend to that kind of a desire for people to really meet up and be together.
Yeah. I can connect to that feeling of, noticing how people move, like visiting New York versus visiting Annapolis. There's just a difference in the way the interactions go. So
Yes.
it's interesting. Would you
And there's
say,
a speed of design for the buildings. If you go, when you go back up and walk through, look at the speed of how it is that buildings are designed. Go
okay,
ahead.
yeah.
Sorry, George.
No, no problem. No problem. Actually, just as a follow-up on that question, I got, would you say there's, physical aspects change your view on architecture? So like, specifically maybe coastal areas versus non-coastal areas. Has that changed?
I think that it's really given me more thought as to how it is that you can shelter while still really being connected to the outside. I think we are very much outdoor seeking people. We want things to be light. We want to somehow be outside, even in the rain. We want to be all part of of the elements. And so it's really given me more thought as to how buildings become more transparent, or how can they become more transparent to address that.
Okay. All right. Nice. Going off that, actually, just a little bit, would you say that architecture, maybe how does architecture connect to nature? Because I think that's a big part, especially in that video, which had
Yes,
beautiful forest scenes, by the way. That was gorgeous.
yes. So I've always in examples, I've seen there's two choices that architecture seems to get to make. You're either kind of standing over nature, and sometimes the example of that would be a building at the end of a cliff that sort of hangs out. Let's say, like some of the California living, where everybody is looking for that view, which is part of nature, but you're really sort of overwhelming nature with your presence, as opposed to being within nature, which might be the writer's studio, which basically you're literally walking in something that makes you remember that trees are outside. So I find the latter. I think I find that over time, I've realized the amount of really cool physics and structure that is found within nature, both in terms of plants and trees, but also even animals, like even small insects, and how they're framed and how those joints move. All of that becomes very intriguing to how things, come together. So I think nature really has a lot of examples that can be followed and are being followed for architecture.
Okay. Actually, jumping off the idea of nature being, having these different styles in relation to nature, would you say you have a favorite architectural style, maybe one you fall back on a lot, or?
Oh gosh, I would tend to say that I have more of a warehousey organic style. I'm very much about the material, the rawness of the material. I like things that represent what they are. So if it is the brick, I like to see it exposed. If it's concrete, I like to see it exposed. I have more of a respect for what's more historic. And I think also that's because of living in, New Orleans and in Pittsburgh. And so I like to see how things stand up, versus hiding the structure behind the building. So my style is probably a little bit more, industrial, maybe more warehouse, a little bit more contemporary in that kind of a sense. I want to see what's behind the skin.
Okay, great. Um, that's I don't know. It's interesting to think about architectural styles like this. I personally haven't really done much with that. I'm a lot more into software, but now seeing like the way buildings are designed is really kind of humbling to me. And actually, I just going off that, one of the questions I have here is it humbling to see, oh, it's like, a large building you've designed after it's built, and just know you had a role to play in that?
you feel small. You feel small after the act. And so just a couple weeks ago, we were in Pittsburgh and we were blocks away from those two research buildings because they happened to be in Oakland, where we were dropping off our daughter, sort of moving her into an apartment. And I was walking by them. And there was a moment that it just kind of made my breath almost stop to think that a decision that I made, not by myself, but that I made with others, was strong enough at that time to continue to last. And so I think that that is that feeling that, it's not so much a proprietary thing. It's more that you together with someone else and this team were able to forecast out how well could this get used. So, for me, I feel small. I look up at the building. They're not big buildings. They're like 9 stories tall, but it does give me this moment of, of humbleness, of just to kind of, feel I'm so glad that it still works versus, man, there it is. It's really more, oh, I'm so glad that it's still working. Yeah.
I'm sure that feeling must be really heightened for the important projects like the, working with the children's hospital, things like that, knowing you had a part.
Again, it was a fortunate accidental road is what I continue to say, because when I first started working with Mr. White, his work was more, we did a lot of warehouse work and petroleum work in New Orleans, but we had a couple of nursing homes, and that was the pivot point. And so these words that we then see on books and in industry, these, the time to pivot, the time to kind of like react, they're life changing. And so I built what I would consider a really, like very, again, humbling and fruitful and surprising career out of pivoting off of nursing homes and taking a chance with the children's hospital job. And so today, even, with this new job at Hopkins in the School of Public Health, I just feel like I've come home, to be back in a research building, to really understand what's happening today. We actually, everybody got sent home, as I said, and we started coming back. And one of the first things that I was asked to do was to move equipment for a lab that was researching for coronavirus. And they were doing, plasma research there. And talk about humbling, talk about like, oh my gosh, this is what takes place here. So I describe sometimes the role of an architect as if you like going to theater and you watch the show, the architects are behind the scenes, and they are, kind of standing there saying, I'm behind the scenes, I've made this, assisted with helping this, but enjoy the show because this is really, a blast. So that's how it feels being back in, in this at Johns Hopkins right now.
Great. Okay. Yeah, just the feeling. It's something like the feeling of being on the the back end. Here I've helped to produce this. If I'm understanding.
Very much. Very much.
So the remainder of the questions I've got actually are largely for tips. So one of the biggest tip ones are there any other degrees that could be helpful in architecture that people might not think about? Maybe it's not the first thing that comes to mind.
Within architecture. So within architecture now, actually, here's an interesting, that when I give it a moment. Recently, I met someone who decided to go into real estate development. Mm-hmm. And he was very interested in architecture. He's probably now in his 4th year. He's from South River, I believe. This is all through the ACE program. And he was very interested in architecture, but he was really interested in the finances behind how a city works. Mm-hmm. And so he ended up going to Drexel, and he found a very interesting degree that allowed him to really more look at real estate aspects of architecture, and being a person that respected the architecture, but being that real estate developer who was more, the budget person, the working with the banks, working with some of the city regulations. That's something that I think is probably on the less expected side. Architects are now becoming strategic planners. So the fact that it's possible to plan a building makes it possible to plan an organization. And so sometimes organizations are turning to architects to say, we are, we're a startup and we now have 20 people. We want to make the next leap. What should we do? And and I find that really fascinating, that it's an architect that will come in and will provide almost like a strategic plan of growth. So that's kind of something that you wouldn't typically think about. The traditionals are, architectural engineering for someone who wants a little bit of both. That's a really super degree. And then, of course, interior design, urban planning, city planning. And if you're interested in that, then there's all the policy making, that comes with that as well.
Okay. What about maybe outside architecture? Like, for example, if someone pursued, architecture and computer programming, would that maybe be something that could relate? Or
So there is a lot of computerization that is needed within architecture. There is a lot of model making, of files keeping, of organizing companies within the world of computing. So while we are, let's say dependent on like AutoCAD and BIM and Revit and all that, I think that there probably will be more advancements of those tools that will now take the design that an architect has into manufacturing. So what I expect will happen is that we won't see always the hand-to-hand installation. We'll begin to see some prefabricated elements, and that has to be computerized, and how it is that it's moving from drawings to there. So there will be a very, there should be a really nice cross section into that as well.
is the field shifting into that, in that direction, prefabricated?
I know that there's a lot, there's specialists. So there are, for as much as there used to be specialists that would be material specialists, there are specialists in terms of more that computing, almost as the systems to keep things together. If you consider their architectural firms can be very, single standing and in one city, or they can be in multiple cities. And so if you are in multiple cities, not only do you need to provide some sort of a sharing infrastructure, but even a learning infrastructure, through computers.
Okay. This gives a really good overview, I think, of a lot of different elements of architecture, and maybe the path of a professional. I don't have any more questions here, except for one, big one I just personally wanted to bring up. I believe you're part of the ACE program, and I was curious if you could maybe describe it for the audience and talk about what it is.
Thank you, and I'd be happy to. So, yes, I am part of the ACE program. ACE stands for Architecture, Construction, and Engineering. I am a board member and have been involved since almost the founding of ACE in Annapolis. So we've been around for, I think, 15 years. I think I've been involved for 14 of those 15. What the program does basically is that we encourage students in the high school level that might be curious about architecture, engineering, or construction to maybe come to some of the club meetings and learn more about what are some of the skills, maybe have a hand on a team design project, just kind of do the different steps that it takes to bring a project together. We typically used hands-on projects, and so we've had little teams design things from houses to renovations to bridges to, we even had a Vietnam memorial, like not the Vietnam, excuse me, the 9/11 memorial was redone recently. As what else would you do to it? So just that challenge of, if you were on the design team, how would you approach it? I've heard back from a number of students now after their first year in college, and for the most part, I would have to say that with few exceptions, they have come back saying that they felt that they really knew what they were getting into, because once they got in, they were like, oh yeah, I got it. We did this and, in ACE. And so they just felt a little bit, less butterflies and more ready to go than some of their peers. So this year we are virtual, which is cool in the fact that we can get to and invite as many more students than we typically have when we are in person. So I'm happy to share that information through TSA if you guys are interested, and and have people join us in the clubs if you're interested as well.
Absolutely. Actually, that gets to my next point. I've had a couple requests for some links. If first of all, any link you believe might be relevant to any sort of pursuing of architecture would be great. But also a link for the ACE program and maybe doing a little bit more, looking into that more, and the video you sent as well. The one that was in your presentation. I've got
Sure.
requests about that.
Sure. What's the best way to share that?
If we can just drop it here in the Zoom chat at some point,
Okay.
and we can add that to the description on the video after the live stream, if that works for you. And so
Okay,
I'll put that
yeah.
as well. All right.
Let's see. So
and we can just add that, and that that way everybody can see it in the description after the videos. Oh, actually, we got here.
So I'm pretty sure that you're gonna, if you go onto studiogang.com, you should be able to, and then it's the ACE Mentor. And I wish our website was as easy as studiogang.com, which I believe that is the, so the ACE Mentor of America program, there's a lot of different affiliates, and the affiliate that is us is the Annapolis affiliate. So you can find us that way.
Got it. Okay. We'll add that to the description, and of course, anything you've got extra, please send it our way, and we'll add it to the description.
Definitely.
I haven't seen any other questions, so I believe that's probably going to be it for tonight. I want to thank you, unless you've got anything else to add.
I have one more thing that I thought of, and that is for anyone interested in going into architecture and looking at schools. The one big question to ask your school is, are you a design school? Are you a school that's more about building and technology? So understand what that program is about, because the different schools are very different. So Tulane was very much a design theory philosophy school, and we were designers, but that was their first thing. There are schools like Auburn, who has a rural studio, who get you out in the middle of the woods and you're working with your hands. So when you are looking at the school, don't just look at the curriculum, ask them what is their philosophy and how is it that they see themselves within the industry. Okay. That's my closing.
All right. Well, thank you very much for all the advice you've given us all, and the presentation you gave us. I think it was wonderful. I think we're going to go ahead and close out. Thank you everyone for showing up, and
thanks guys for being
here. Have
a
great evening.